Hey, this is John Ridley.
And this is Matt Carey, senior documentary editor at Deadline.com.
Matt, welcome back.
Thank
from
you.
Your European, I don't want to say your European excursion, because
A loaded
that likely
term
hints that you were attacking someone. Who knew?
Trump administration.
That's apparently the new word for
An excursion,
going
a
to war
holiday.
for no good reason.
Mm.
We're gonna talk a lot about that, going to war for no good reason. But before we get to there, I do want to welcome you back.
Thank you.
You were in Greece, correct? Then you went over
Greece,
to
Thessaloniki, and then went to Copenhagen for CPH docs.
By the way, thank you for your reportage from both. But we got a report from Thessaloniki. I believe we got one from Copenhagen. So you're not going to just like look at tulips or whatever. You're going to do work. How was it though? Did you have time to enjoy yourself? Stop and smell the flowers?
CPH docs has become very, very big. And so they have great panel discussions. They have a forum there, which is kind of the pitching outlet. And then, of course, the festival itself, which has over 200 films this year.
Wow.
It was a great deal to see. And it was also a really interesting time to be there because the festival started just before the Oscars. And lo and behold, a Danish production wound up winning Best Documentary Feature. That's Mr. Nobody Against Putin. And of course, that's directed by David Borenstein, who is American. However, he's based in Copenhagen, produced by one of the producers is Czech. Another producer is Danish. It's basically a Danish production. And so there was a lot of excitement after Mr. Nobody Against Putin won the Oscar. This Danish documentary production, as we've talked about, is really an amazing and a wonder to behold. And they've been nominated many times in recent years, for instance, for like Flea, which earned 3 Academy Award nominations, A House Made of Splinters, many documentaries, great documentaries coming out of there. This was their first victory in that category. So it was a huge deal. And it was very neat also to see David Borenstein sort of return in triumph. I saw him at the CPH Docs award show. He was on hand and being heartily congratulated, as you might imagine, by everyone there. So that was really special to be there at such a moment.
Well, well deserved to be there. I know, again, you're doing a lot of work, but it's, I think, really nice. I would imagine, I can't say, really nice for you to see some people that you cover professionally, but know personally, get to have their moment, but not only have their moment here in Hollywood, but have that moment back at home. That's got to be really, really wonderful.
Yeah, and for me, it was also neat just to be able to say to David Borenstein, the director, that I thought he gave the most important speech of the Academy Awards. He really, I thought, threaded a needle by referring to the content of his film, which of course is about Pavel, nicknamed Pasha Palankin, who was the co-director, who was like a videographer and events coordinator for a primary school in Russia, decided not to go along with the government's plan after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine to indoctrinate students nationwide. He really refused to implement that curriculum. And as a result, you can imagine, he's driven out of there. Well, in his speech at the Oscars, David, without invoking the name of a certain president of the United States, really talked about what can happen when your country falls under the thumb of an authoritarian. So that was just, for me, was meaningful to be able to express my gratitude that he'd spoken so articulately about that.
You mentioned 2 films. One, obviously, Mr. Nobody. You also mentioned Flea, which is a phenomenal documentary, largely about forced migration, which is very different than, hey, I would like to migrate somewhere because that's my choice. Those 2 films, both coming out of Denmark, but those 2 films, which are subject matter that relates a bit to another film that we are talking about today, that is very much unfortunately, about the war, this illegal action that's going on with Russia, not talking about America right now, Russia and the Ukraine, but also ultimately then talking about people who are forced to leave their homes, not by their choice, but by necessity. The film that we are talking about today, and the director who we're speaking with, who is Julia Loktev, her film is My Undesirable Friends, Part 1, last air in Moscow.
Ты встаешь с утра, страшно на самом деле взять телефон. Тут задержали, тут экстремисты, тут нежелательная организация.
You've had the opportunity to speak with Julia in the past.
Yes, I spoke with her in just before the start of Oscar-shortlisted voting. That documentary, it's over 5 hours long. It was shortlisted. The Academy Awards, won a bunch of prizes. It was a few weeks ago acquired by Mubi, and it's going to be premiering on Mubi's streaming service this Friday, the 3rd of April. And also, Mubi picked up the sequel that Julia's working on, of My Undesirable Friends Part 2, which is going to look at primarily the young women in the film, all driven into exile. So, incredible story.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. It's an incredible film, and it's an amazing watch. Here's our conversation with Julia Loktev, who is the director, also editor, producer, does many things on this film, and it's extraordinary. My Undesirable Friends, Part 1, last air in Moscow. We are joined today by the director of My Undesirable Friends, Part 1, last air in Moscow, Julia Loktev. Julia, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Thanks.
The documentary it's extraordinary. Extraordinary in its content, extraordinary in its dispensation, and extraordinary in the subjects who are, I say relatively young people. The fact of the matter is they're young people who are choosing to stay in an environment where they have been tagged not just as nuisances, not just as opposition press, but really enemies of the state, but choose to tell the story, at least in part 1 of your film, of the early days of the war against Ukraine, because the Ukrainians ain't fighting a war except to save themselves, and doing so at incredible risk of themselves and their lives. And not long after, a few opposition individuals have been assassinated. So what you're undertaking is extraordinary. And as I said, it's extraordinary in its length and breadth and depth. But let's step back for a moment and get some perspective on how you came to this story and why it was so urgent for you at that time. And I don't want to say predicted, but the war was coming and you were in place to cover it from a very unique angle.
Right. The important thing is nobody knew that a full-scale war of the kind of horrific criminal nature that we've seen now for over 4 years, which is unimaginable, would be coming. Nobody could imagine something like that, that Russia would invade Ukraine in the kind of way that they have, bombing Kiev, utterly unimaginable. So when I started filming, I had no idea that I was going to walk into capturing history and capturing really the last days of when it was possible to work openly as the opposition and say most of what you want in Russia openly as journalists before Russia started this full-scale war and all the characters had to flee the country. And that was kind of terrible historic events, but also director's luck in that sense that I walked into capturing history. And I think the thing that we did, and with my co-director Anna Nemzer, who's one of the main characters, we paid attention when there were warning signs. And when we started making the film, there was a warning sign, which is Russia named all these journalists. And at the time it was only 25. Now there's hundreds, foreign agents. And we thought it was incredibly disturbing when journalists who are from that country, Russian journalists writing for Russians, are suddenly having to mark everything they write with this long, very legalistic paragraph saying that this is brought, in effect, in very legal terms, saying this is brought to you by a foreign agent, which generally does not add to anybody's credibility,
Right.
And they had to mark everything they wrote with this. I mean, ranging from their articles, and L had to be like in all caps, like it's like Hollywood credits. It had to be larger than anything else written on the page. It was stipulated that it had to be in the biggest font. And they'd have to mark their Instagram stories. I mean, things that had nothing to do, like in a parents' chat, they'd have to mark, that they're a foreign agent. And we paid attention when this was happening, when journalists are forced to mark themselves as others and basically, in an attempt to discredit them in the eyes of the public. That's disturbing. And little did we know that it was going to be the start of this huge historic moment.
So let's step back for 1 second. There is a particular outlet that you're focusing on throughout the film. And I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's Rain TV. And at that time, they were the last independent journalism source in all of Russia. Massive, massive nation.
So they were the last independent TV station, and there's several news sources in the film. They're the flashiest. They're the ones that everybody pays attention to, because Rain was like, it was a TV studio, and it was a TV news studio that really didn't look like you're used to seeing TV news studios. I mean, they had hot pink neon everywhere. The director of Rain had a neon sign saying sex above her door. There were bands playing every time you walked in, it seemed. And it was really like a kind of, at a time that protest in the street had become nearly impossible, it was the last place that was a gathering place of the opposition, that everyone it was a lot of really super young people, a lot of the journalists are in their 20s, but then you'd have activists who are in their 80s coming out, people who go back to the Soviet Union. And it was like this forum of the opposition, but a visual, it's a TV medium, it's a visual medium. If you saw the Navalny film, for example, much of the footage you're seeing in there that, is from Russia, it's Rain footage. You're watching him come back live on Rain, which is what people did. They watch it like the OJ chase, on Rain as he was getting on the plane, really. And the protests they would watch, it's like if you wanted to know what was going on. But the film also features journalists there's journalists from Novaya Gazeta, which goes back to the post-Soviet times. And also a young investigative outlet called Important Stories that does a lot of investigation, worked on the Panama Papers or the Pandora Papers. I always mix up the Pandora and the Panama Papers. Sorry, there was the second one of those. I apologize.
There's always, there are papers that very powerful people don't want you to see.
Yes,
Panama,
they work on things that digging up stuff.
The other thing your film does is that it lingers with these individuals and lingers in their lives and lingers in their fear. And they're not superhuman. They're not Clark Kent. I'm going to tell this story. They're scared, but it's like, there's a line, I think, somewhere in the film. Once you leave, you're no longer a journalist. The journalists are the ones who stay. You want to report about the war from France? You can. It's better than nothing. But the journalists stay.
And that became impossible, of course. All of these people and they are incredibly, incredibly young. I mean, it's crazy. There's 20, there's an anchor who's 22, and I've just been filming her in Amsterdam now. She's 26. She just got sentenced in absentia to prison in Russia. But, she's she's a super professional anchor, on a television channel. They're not screwing around. They're really, it's just a lot of them have been working since they were very young, have decided at a very young age. Most of them have grown up under Putin. There's one of the main characters says, look, as long as I've known there was such a thing as a president, because you don't really know when you're 3 what a president is, it's been Putin, and they've lived under this and somehow still felt they had to fight and they had to resist. And they still, even though there was little reason to believe that, Russia would change, they thought that, okay, it can be a little bit better, or they thought it wouldn't be quite as horrific as it turned out to be, because there was this incredible slide, it was already heading towards authoritarianism, but nothing like what we're seeing now. And they were all trying to stay there and work until the last minute. I think that's largely what the film is about, is how, it's good people who are trying to be good, living under a very bad government and trying to see how they can make their society better. Until the very last, until it becomes impossible. Because what happens is, all of them are trying to stay in Russia. They're trying to stay one more day, one more month. Because if you're in a country reporting about that country for the country people, it is better to be inside that country. You're on the ground. And all of them are trying to stay. And then what happens is, the first part of the film is like, it feels, I mean, it's the months before, and there's this building crackdown where every day more people are getting arrested, more people are getting searched. Things are feeling really grim. The outlook is not good, but still nobody knows that there's a full-scale war coming. And then when Russia starts a full-scale war in Ukraine, they basically make it illegal to call it a war. They use terms which are becoming bizarrely familiar to us as Americans, like they use the word special military operation. They don't use words like excursion, but they, special combat operation. I've heard from Trump, but they say they're supposed to call it a special military operation, and if you call it a war, that's illegal. And you have to say every single thing you say. You have to say, well, the Ministry of Defense denies this. Yes, here we are showing an apartment building in Kiev being bombed, but the Ministry of Defense says you're not seeing what you're seeing. We don't hit civilian targets, and they have to kind of continue to try to report on this criminal war while the Russian government makes it utterly impossible for them. And then it's like the clock is just ticking. Things change every hour, and within 1 week, Russia shuts down all independent media. It becomes impossible. So all of these people end up facing, having tried to stay in their country and work till the last minute, they all end up facing this choice of, do we go to prison? Well, we're not going to be really very useful as journalists. There is this idea, yes, you can't be a journalist from France or from wherever, you should be on the ground, but you certainly can't be a journalist from prison.
Right.
It's very, very difficult to get a report out. You're not going to be of use to anyone. And so pretty much, every character in the film fled. And, this is what the film captures, is having to leave your country. They have not been back since in those years. They can't go back. They would be arrested. And they all gave up their homes so that they could continue to report on this criminal war. But you're right. It does linger in the sense that linger is not really the word. I probably wouldn't choose that word. Because when I think of linger, I think of like long meditative shots, and like the shots don't linger. These are the shortest shots. It is definitely like the shot length compared to my previous fiction film. It's really fast cut and it moves really fast, but it covers such a period where so much is happening. And for me, the way to capture it is through life. Like, what does it feel like to live through it? What does it feel like to be fighting for your country, to be trying to live life and, having to feed your daughter and worrying about, like, are you going to have to leave the country, and being with a community of friends and just continuing to fight till the end until you all have to run.
And Julia, you approach this film from such an interesting vantage point because you were born in what was then the Soviet Union and immigrated to the U.S. at age 9. So obviously you speak Russian.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm curious. There was a period of hope after the fall of the Soviet Union. Clearly, there were a somewhat close relationship between Yeltsin and Clinton. It seemed. It wasn't long before Putin snuck his way in there and basically took over, I think, to the alarm and surprise of Yeltsin and of Gorbachev, for that matter. I'm just curious about how wrenching it has sort of been for you and your family to see what has become of Russia under Putin, and this apparent desire to reestablish a kind of Stalinist version of the Russian Empire that is both very repressive at home and expansionist outside of its borders.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't personally live through the hope. We did leave the Soviet Union, so I was watching it as much, I'm an insider in many ways. Like, Russian is the language I speak to my mother, but, we left in 1979 and my mom's been back twice. So it hasn't been, it wasn't personal for us that way. I think seeing it, I don't know if the hope was, we didn't live through it there, but, obviously I saw it through people I knew there. But also it's just been so long, and Yeltsin anointed Putin, but it's like, and we should have known 20 years ago. It was, there's the expression of you boil the frog slowly, and it was all happening very slowly. And then it started happening very, very fast. Like, obviously, it should have been clear after Crimea, and yet still after Crimea, it was still possible to live in Russia and kind of work out in the open as the opposition. Nobody could imagine it would get this bad, like what we're seeing. Should have. I mean, many of the characters would say they should have, but also many of the characters, what's interesting, didn't live through that hope either. I mean, some of them,
they're too young. Yeah.
They're 26. They didn't get the good years. They literally, like the 90s or something, they heard about from their parents. That type of opening. This is all they've ever known, and I find that fascinating. The idea that people could be born in this society, and you use what weeds will grow through asphalt. You will use whatever freedom, and there's still a whole society of people. Let's say. Not only journalists, because these people were all interconnected with activists who were trying to work on different things to make the society better, whether it's for people with disabilities, whether it's for the LGBTQ population, for press freedoms, people with HIV. I mean, like a range of everybody, obviously, how you treat anyone is how you treat everyone. And they were all working towards a society that would have more respect for human rights, towards obviously a Russia that would not have invaded Ukraine. I mean, all of them think Russia is committing war crimes and would love to see those responsible in The Hague.
Partly what I find so poignant about the film is, as we've said, these are very young people, and they grew up maybe after that time in which Russia's future was uncertain, and it seemed as if possibly democratic institutions might be allowed to flourish. There might be a civil society that could, rise up. But these people are young where that didn't really happen. And yet they believe in freedom. And partly what I find so astounding is they articulate and value democracy more than so many Americans do right now. We're seeing our democracy basically being frittered away and eroded left and right. These people in Russia, these heroic people, are really true defenders of it.
Well, I mean, first of all, there was a civil society, and that's what they were creating, like everyone together. And this film is very much about community. I'm not a fan of films that kind of make a hero out of someone. And all of these people will say we're not heroes. It is really like it takes a community of people, and all of these people are interconnected. And as a community, as journalists, as civil societies, they were all working, until the last minute. How do we make this a better place? How do we make this society? I don't know if they believe more than Americans, but they certainly believe in things. One of the things that I've had people say to me, and it's cheesy, so let's admit it's cheesy, but they I've heard it over and over. They're like, I've never seen Russians like this, because we're used to seeing a Russia that doesn't look like, they're Russians that don't look like people, usually. Like most films about Russia show it as a place that feels very far away, where unpleasant things are happening, and it has nothing to do with us. I mean, all these characters, they hate watch Emily in Paris, they're constantly referring to Harry Potter, they had Netflix until, full scale invasion. They shopped at Zara and H&M, they're constantly, I feel like they know more about American pop culture than I do. Being Gen Z, they are very much connected to this world, and they have the same values. Like most of them, when they came to the, for the first couple of years, and they're still doing it, but every time, wherever they moved, because they've moved to so many different countries. But, I was always seeing for places, it's Pride was happening. They were out. Didn't matter if they were queer or not. They were just so thrilled that they were able to be out and open, not, whether they're just queer adjacent, queer friendly allies. They were just excited to be in a society because, Russia, for example, has declared the LGBT movement an extremist terrorist organization. So they largely believe in values, that at least it's hard to say, it's hard to speak of a we, but okay, I'm going to speak of a we as in terms of most people I know, because obviously we know there are people who don't support those values, but kind of do support. They share, they're familiar. Most of these characters are incredibly, incredibly familiar. They seem like people you might know, except they happen to have been living in a kind of can I say shitty in a shitty under a very shitty government, under a very shitty government, which is I think also becoming really, really familiar, maybe. So,
there is a moment in the film you talk about these folks being young and looking at the world through sort of a pop culture sensibility. After the war starts, the Nike store in support of the Ukraine says that they're going offline. They're not going to allow folks from Russia to shop. And that's when the young people go, okay, now this war is going to fall apart. When the young people can't get their Nikes, when and by the way, you talk about the parallels to the world we live in. The minute the stock market goes up and down, that's what influences our great leaders. Incredibly sharp, analysis of strategic combat versus actually having thought anything out. Julia, I know you say, and you and I use slightly different semantics, and I don't mean linger in this film in a bad way,
go for it.
But you spend time with people where we see them as people. And it is incredibly thorough. I'm curious for you, as you were going into this film, and I'm talking about putting the film together, when you started to make the decisions that you were not necessarily going to limit yourself, and that this is part one of a two-part film, that second part is yet coming, but you are hyper invested in these people, the story, and putting it in front of the rest of us. I'm curious how you came to those decisions when putting this film together.
When I started out filming, I thought it was going to be a film about journalists facing a crackdown, trying to figure out how to respond to it. But that was before any of us had any idea Russia would start this full-scale war. They would all flee into exile. And so it became pretty clear that it was a bigger story, when Russia invaded Ukraine and things were just happening at this pace because 1 million people left. It's this historic exodus. Yeah. Obviously, we've seen it in other countries, this moment where the society transformed so quickly. And, none of them are going back for any foreseeable future. And so at that point, I was just thinking film. I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm going to sit around thinking about structure. I'm like, run, capture this, get this. I was like, keep filming, hold your elbows in your stomach, keep your camera steady and focus on the important emotions. Because it is really true. And that way I appreciate that you say it lingers because the film is really through characters, I'm a little worried that we talk about it now and we're talking about all the underlying political issues, but this is very much a character-based film where you get to know people. And you feel like they I've had people say that they feel like they become their friends. They really feel like these characters and you live through this momentous moment with these characters as they have to flee their country. And so I just was filming, I was there the first week of the full-scale war. Every day people were leaving. I was there when rain got shut down and people were literally facing this decision of, do we go to work tomorrow? No, go to the airport now. And so people went home, packed carry-on suitcase and left the country, not to come back for possibly decades. And then I stayed another day because I couldn't join them because I had 2 nights worth of footage that, I was sending drives out as things were happening and, other people were leaving. I was getting copies of my footage out just as backup. But at that point I had 2 nights of incredible footage. I said, I can't get on a plane. I can't go to the border control and give them my stuff. So I stayed a day. I uploaded all my footage over an incredibly slow hotel Wi-Fi. If you've ever tried to do that, it's hell, And then I joined them a day later, first in Istanbul. And then I was going from country to country to country to country for what became My Undesirable Friends Part 2 Exile, where I filmed in a dozen countries because people keep changing countries. And it's a different, volume of the same story. It's a separate film. What does it mean to lose your country? And also simultaneously, I think what's interesting about Part 2 is not only is this historic exodus that we get to see in real time, but it's also these people go from feeling like they're the good guys and fighting for society, where now they're also feeling like they're the bad guys because they can't wash their hands of the war. Even though they all oppose the war, they all feel incredibly guilty for not having been able to prevent it.
And Julia, when you are, as you say, very much at work and made a lot of progress on Part 2, do you want to bring that out this year? Is that your plan?
Yes. I think In fact, I think today filmed today and yesterday, I think I filmed the last, what I think will be the last scene in part 2. I mean, the rest of it is all edited, and I've been waiting for this one thing to happen, which is, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I won't tell you, but like, let's just say
That's the biggest tease in the world.
arrests. Yeah, like literally, like, yeah, it's, it only gets worse. I mean, but it's
my
also,
gosh.
it's almost finished. We're really excited about it. It's also epic. Also, I mean, epic, I say this kind of as a format, not as like, yeah, it's epic. But just, but it is kind of, you're living through something that you rarely get to see in real time. Obviously, there have been other, I don't know, what is the plural of exoduses, exodi.
We're intelligent people. We can make up words.
Where people have fled their country, whether it's Iranians after the revolution, during World War II in Germany, under Franco's regime in Spain. I mean, Chile, where people leave their country en masse, and try to live elsewhere, which is very different from immigration, I think, in some ways. It's and I'm very aware of this. It's something that, as a child immigrant whose parents were 40 when they left, but they left with the intention of, becoming Americans with thick Russian accents, which my parents had, but it's a different thing when you're, especially because all of them continue to work as journalists in exile. So it's, for me, I had this incredible kind of coming back to your, original question, like, when did I realize that I thought the story deserved this? I mean, how rarely do we get this chance? We have these characters that we know the way we kind of rarely see characters that intimately in a doc where it's over many years. I don't know. At one point, they joked with me. They're like, "Are you going to be making like the 7-Up series with us?" I was like, that you get to know, you really live life through life with people, and then you experience, because it's filmed in close up. Like the whole film is almost entirely close ups of people. And, people that very intimate.
Oh, it is very intimate. And it's really fascinating how you structure it. When I got to speak with you back in December, I asked you about that. And you said such an interesting thing that you thought about it in terms of scenes. You're filming scenes and you're constructing it out of scenes. And it completely pulls one in, as an audience member, where you feel very much embedded in their lives as their lives become ever more fraught, and they're just, the screws are being tightened with every day. It's absolutely gripping. And both part 1 and part 2, the upcoming part 2, have been acquired by Mubi. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Very excited about that.
Yeah. And part 1 is going to premiere on Mubi on its streaming service this Friday, the 3rd. Which is great news. You're also, I wanted to mention that you won a huge amount of awards, including the Gotham Awards, and late last year, and were nominated for the Film Independent Spirit Awards, and you won the Los Angeles Film Critics Association Awards, National Society of Film Critics, New York Film Critics Circle Awards. So
if only film critics ran the world. If only.
Well, they clearly have good taste. But I mean, I think, it's pretty remarkable for a film of the length that it is, that people really engaged with it and were moved by it. And, we've hinted at that. But for those who want to sort of reflect on that, it really, I think, has a lot to say about the U.S. right now and what happens in authoritarian societies. So there's, to me, a very tragic element of the story of tremendously energetic, bright people being driven out of their country. This is a tragedy, absolute tragedy. So Julia Loktev, thank you so much for being with us and talking to us about My Undesirable Friends, Part 1, last air in Moscow. Be followed soon by My Undesirable Friends, Part 2, Exile. Again, thank you so much for being with us on Doc Talk.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Matt, a really, really extraordinary film. I know there's some people, even doc lovers, they're going to hear, oh my gosh, this is 5 hours. I don't know about it. It is immersive, and you are with these folks every step of the way. I got to give a quick shout out, though, Matt, to Mubi. You know,
Yes,
as you know,
distributor.
right, the distributor of this film, and there are a couple other films I want to mention, but as you know, it's getting harder and harder, unfortunately, for documentary filmmakers to find distribution. And I think it's getting certainly more and more difficult for documentary filmmakers who are really experimenting with the form. And sometimes experimenting with the form is experimenting with the length. And certainly Julia is doing that. But then, okay, great, you did it. Where does it go?
Yes.
And Mubi is picked this up. They're airing part 1. I believe they're going to air part 2 when that's finished. Mubi is also doing a film that we saw recently and talked to the director, Gianfranco Rossi, Pompeii Below the Clouds, which I think you and I find to be an extraordinary film.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even in seeing it, you go, okay, where does this go? Dahomey, Matty Diep's film, is also, I believe, on Mubi. So just a shout out to Mubi. Thank you for existing. Thank you for finding these documentaries and airing them. But most importantly, you know, thank you for being, what I like about Mubi, they have ads, but they don't make you pay for the ads. They're just like, I don't know, young people don't realize there was a time where you just watch television. Yeah, they show you an ad or two. You just kind of put up, you didn't have to pay to see the ads, which is now the new formula. You pay money for your subscription, you get the ads. So Mubi, just a shout out, it's there. We get folks all the time who genuinely and honestly and truly bemoan the fact it's harder and harder to see documentaries. I would say vote with your dollars, but the great thing with Mubi, you don't have to vote with your dollars. You can just show up and watch.
Yeah, it's they really do have some remarkable documentaries. That they have films of all kind on the Mubi streaming platform.
Yeah,
but among the other documentaries they've got is Finding Vivian Maier, which was Oscar nominated a few years ago. John, probably a film you know about because it's about that photographer, Vivian Maier. That's such an incredible story. Yeah, we need the distributors, and preferably distributors with good taste that are making
they certainly seem to have that. And by the way, as you say, many, many things on Mubi. Many things on Mubi. And in fact, I want to say I finally ended up watching Enter the Void on Mubi, which is one of the most stunning films I've ever seen. But man, it's hard. But to your point, Matt, Mubi has some well-curated entertainment, and it's there for the taking. I really encourage people to take a look and see that when they can, where they can. Matt, thank you as always for your travel. Are you going to be here for a minute?
Well, I'm going up to the Sonoma International Film Festival tomorrow.
Jesus God. Oh my, Matt, here's what I want to do. I want you, seriously, this is my serious pitch to you. I want you to pick a film festival anywhere in the world. Just pick one. And that's the one I'm going to go with you to that film festival.
All
now,
right.
a couple of parameters. Can I give you a couple of parameters?
Of course.
Preferably any film festival in the world that's being held either in Morocco or Laos.
Okay.
But other than that,
investigating on that, I would love to go to either country, which I've never visited before.
Well, I figure if you and I are going to, go out in the world together and do this like road trip,
that's fantastic.
Going to San Diego, I'm pretty sure. No disrespect, I love San Diego, but I think we've been there. But yeah, it'd be fun. So I'm gonna.
Okay, I'm gonna
in
work
all
on
seriousness, pick a film festival in the world.
All right,
preferably those two countries, but I'll take what I can get.
Okay, all right, we're gonna work on that.
Please travel safely, Matt. I'm just gonna get a T-shirt that I wear. Please travel safely, Matt. Appreciate you getting out in the world. Appreciate that you're back here, and thank you as always for sending those those interviews that you did from the previous film festivals. We'll see everybody next week on Doc Talk. We got something. It's a big surprise, even to us, but we got something. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see everybody again on Doc Talk.